Welcome to this convocation. This is a very important week in the life of our seminary as we lift up the importance and history of African American preaching tradition, preaching and worship. We are enriched by that, and we're eager to celebrate and share that with the larger constituency and indeed the world. And this time on Tuesday, this lecture holds a special place during that week where we're not gathered for worship and preaching, but rather for a distinguished lecture on preaching and the way it affects our congregational life and often issues of social justice. We're breaking from the norm a little bit this year. We typically have one lecturer focusing on a particular theme or topic, but we realized in planning this week and this convocation in particular that some subjects are really too big, too complex for one person to address in a single lecture. And so we're delighted to have a distinguished panel of guests and speakers to help us think with some subtlety and complexity, but also profound earnestness about what is the role of our faith communities, preaching, worship, but our life in and of the church to address the rampant violence and the use of violence and terrorism across our land, and particularly and horrifyingly in our sacred places and our faith communities. So the topic is immense, grave, and important, which is why we are giving this time, hoping that this is a catalytic moment, that it provokes more conversation and more attention to build on work that a number of people have already done and to take that further as we see ourselves aligned with the one who brought peace and who eschewed violence at every course and died in order to make us free. So again, be welcome here. Know we're grateful for your presence and for your life of faith in the world.
On today, our discussion is terrorism in America, sacred places. As Dr. Lose has stated, normally this presentation is one person. At our Utica quarterly meeting, it was decided that we needed to talk about terrorism in America, but not just what happens in other places, but what we may consider sacred places. What prompted this was on June the 17th, 2015, 9 people were killed at Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina. And it triggered our thoughts and how we as a seminary community could address what is happening in our nation. As we gave this some thought, though, we wanted to recognize that in the African tradition, the sacred and the secular are the same. And my mind immediately went back to Sandy Hook Elementary School on December the 14th, 2012, when we saw that shooting take place. For us who have children or grandchildren, a school is a sacred place. But it's just not the Christian faith, because here in Philadelphia, I believe the date was December the 8th, 2015, a severed pig's head was left at a North Philadelphia mosque. And it was still a form of terrorism at a sacred place. As I introduce this subject matter, I just want to highlight a few things that I came across that you may find interesting. February the 14th, 2010 in Richmond, California, 3 hooded men walked in the Gethsemane Church of God in Christ and opened fire. They fled the scene as the singing of the choir was replaced by frightened screams. The 2 victims, a 14-year-old boy and a 19-year-old man, were hospitalized. May 20th, 2007, Moscow, Idaho, a standoff between police and a suspect in the shootings of 3 people in a Presbyterian church ended with 3 dead, including 1 police officer. August the 12th, 2017, in Missouri, First Congregational Church, 3 killed. Eichen Elman Salmon shot and killed the pastor and 2 deacons and wounded 5 others. October the 5th, 2003, in Atlanta, Georgia, at the Turner Monumental AME Church, 2 killed, plus shooter. And I'm highlighting these because what happens is just not a total stranger sometimes, but in this case, Sheila Wilson walked into the church while preparations were being made for service, shot the pastor, her mother, and then herself. May 18th, 2001, in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, Greater Oak Missionary Baptist Church, 2 killed. Frederick Rafford stood up in the middle of a revival service and began shooting at his estranged wife, Nicole Rafford, killing her and a woman trying to help. You will find that there is a website that has a database now of national church shootings. As we prepare to hear from our panelists, Dr. Mark Kelly Tyler, the pastor of Mother Bethel AME Church, could not be with us on today. We had invited him because he was a personal friend of Reverend Pinckney, the pastor of Mother Emanuel, who was shot in Charleston, South Carolina. Today we have with us the Reverend Dr. Kevin Johnson, lead pastor of Dare to Imagine Church, president and CEO of the Philadelphia OIC. He is an activist. He also has a column in our local newspaper. His voice is heard, and we thought he would greatly bring much to this discussion. We also have our own Dr. Katie Day, the Charles A. Shuren Professor of Church and Society at LTSP. She published a book, and most recently the book that she has is called Faith on the Avenue, Religions on a City Street. That city street is Germantown Avenue. If you want to know anything about any church on Germantown, now not the church is off. Grace is off of Germantown. We did not get included. You have to have an address on Germantown, but it could be a cathedral or a storefront. Katie Day knows it. And then we have with us Mr. Everett Gillison, former Chief of Staff and Deputy Mayor for Public Safety for the city of Philadelphia, who will bring a certain knowledge of terrorism in sacred places that we do not know about in Philadelphia, that the city knows but was never reported in our newspapers. At this time, I present to you Dr. Kevin Johnson.
Good morning to everyone. Glad to be here. I'm always excited to come back here to Lutheran Theological Seminary, to Dr. Luz and to the entire team, and of course, Dr. Robertson here. Thank God for each and every one of you. We are in a very interesting period in American history when you look at what has taken place in politics and the violence that has escalated, whether from Chicago or on the streets and Cleveland or down in North Carolina. There is a thread that is really running through the blood of America. And I would dare say to us that when we talk about American terrorism, we just cannot talk about it from really a 20th century perspective. We really have to go back to the founding of this country. We have to go back to those who were brought here against their will. And when you look at the seeds of terrorism, terrorism just did not start. Terrorism did not start with 9/11, as tragic as that event was, but really terrorism has always been a part of the fabric of the United States of America. And so that has to be said from the beginning. And I share that with you because I'm reminded of a story in which I often tell about really the kind of how those who have been kissed by nature's son, how they arrived here. And that is, story goes, is that there was an auction that was taking place. And at this particular auction, there was a mother who watched the ship that bared her son, the progenitor of her faith, sail slowly but surely away. She knew that the ship would return, but she would never see her son again. I also tell the story that, you would go to some southern city and you would see an auction taking place, and there would be a young woman brought forth, and the person would say, bitter man, what do I hear for this fine young black girl? Pretty isn't she? She can nurse your children. She can take care of your family. She can provide you many hours of carnal pleasure, if you know what I mean. Bitter man, what do I hear for this fine young black girl? That is really how we came here. And I share those stories with you because terrorism at its heart really deals with the fact that we are not comfortable and secure with who we really are. And so when you get to the essence, and we're going to talk about it in sacred places, but it really deals with insecurity on the terrorist part. Because if you are really secure in who you are, then you will not try to denigrate or try to malign another person to help you feel better. And so when I look at Donald Trump, it's amazing that he can have all of these billions of dollars, have all of these hotels with his name on it, Trump, but yet he's the most insecure person, in my opinion, in the world. And the reason why I say that is because if you are secure in who you are, you don't have to say anything negative about somebody else. If you are really confident in who you are, you don't have to denigrate someone else. And so at the heart of terrorism, and when you look at American terrorism, it is the fact that people are not secure. So Reverend Robinson, he's already talked about Charleston, but I think about September 15th, down in that southern town in Birmingham, Alabama, at 16th Street Baptist Church. And those little girls who were bombed there just trying to be in church. And we could go through and talk about a number of places and bombings where people have been vandalized and where people have been terrorized. But I want to share some more stats with you because for me, this became quite interesting as I began to focus on this even more so here in preparation for today, not just focus on September 15th, 1963, but also when you look at the fact that in 2013, the most recent year in which the federal data is available, the FBI identified 3,563 victims of racially motivated hate crimes. Black victims constituted, watch this, 66% of the total. 21% were victims of anti-white bias, and 4.6% were victims of anti-Asian bias, and 4.5% were victims of anti-Native American bias. What this says to me more than anything is that we have some work to do on ourselves. And when you look at it from a biblical standpoint with Cain and Abel, Cain decided to kill Abel not because he was happy with what God had blessed him with, but because he was upset with what he saw that his brother had. And sometimes you have to appreciate what you have instead of gleaning what somebody else has and wishing that you had it. Because the blessing that somebody else has their name on it. You need to learn how to cultivate the gift and the blessing that God has given you and celebrate that. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a great beginning. As one thing that Dr. Robertson did not mention is that I've also been very involved in researching and advocating around the issue of gun violence for a long time, since really started when we had a seminary-sponsored bus to go to the Million Mom March. So I've been at this for a long time. And this conversation was really prompted by the massacre in Charleston. And that was an extraordinary, shocking, disturbing event. And some of us here went within 24 hours to Mother Bethel for a service in solidarity with the people of Mother Emanuel Church. And the membership of Mother Bethel, of which Pastor Tyler is the lead pastor and could not be here today. But they were traumatized, and this was within 24 hours. They had not caught the shooter yet. And there was the possibility of copycat crime. And yet, that sanctuary within 24 hours was packed. And it was packed not only with the members of the church, but with Christians of all denominations and Jews and Muslims who came in solidarity. And Reverend Tyler was so moved, and he said, wow, and you're not even AME. And somebody said, we're all AME tonight. And then that became the refrain, we're all AME tonight.
Wow.
So it struck me that here in the most vulnerable moment of this church's life and for AMEs, the protection was in solidarity. You didn't see people with arms. You didn't see armed guards. There were a couple of beefy guys at the door, but and I wasn't doing a metal detector, but my hunch is that the protection being sought was in God and the people of God. And I think in the days that followed, and the witness of the people from Mother Emanuel really showed that. So that launched me into a line of research that I'm going to pursue a lot in the next year. And in fact, I would love to interview any of you if you have thoughts about guns in churches. If you remember, after that, and after so many of the massacres, President Obama talks about the kind of grim pattern that has developed, the kind of litany that has developed after each one of these, where he speaks, he brings his words of sorrow and comfort and offers the thoughts and prayers of the nation to a community, and then he talks about, can't we do better than this? And then what happens every time is there's an uptick in gun sales. So everybody was kind of watching to see what the black community and black churches and Mother Emanuel was going to do in the wake of this. Were they going to say, that's it, we have to arm ourselves? Because the number one reason people buy guns in this country is for protection. So are they going to turn in that direction? And certainly the National Rifle Association was doing a subtle campaign within African American churches to convince them that this was the time to start buying weapons. And there was some indication that there was slight increase of African Americans who believed that perhaps guns would be more of a source of protection than a source of endangerment. But even with that slight increase, far below the white community. So one of the things my students know about me is I love data, and I have some numbers, but these are not like, these are disturbing numbers. These are disturbing numbers and curious numbers. So one of the things that's really curious is that 43% of all American households have a gun. That's across the board, 43%. And when you break it out by race and religion, it's much more within white evangelical households. 61% of white evangelical households have guns. And yet, African American Protestants, only 22%. Half of the overall rate of gun ownership in the country, and a third of white evangelicals. And it's also low among Latinos, 24% Latino Catholics, Latino Christians, I should say, including Pentecostals, and Jews and Muslims, 29%. So why is this? Why is it that those who are the most vulnerable in our society, African Americans, Latinos, Jews, Muslims, why are they so much less likely to have guns in their household? That's the question that I'm really pursuing. And the pattern follows when you look at what people say about what will prevent mass shootings. All Americans think that 25% think stricter gun laws, but when you look at African American Christians, it's 31%. So across the board, gun laws, ways of prevention, much more prominent is among African American Christians is the belief that better security measures, and I've interviewed some clergy who have said, yeah, after Charleston, we didn't give our ushers guns, but boy, we installed a few other security cameras. So why is it that the most vulnerable are least likely to take up arms? And then conversely, why is it that those who are the least vulnerable, white Christian men, are the most likely to own and carry guns? And by the way, overwhelmingly, the most likely to commit suicide with guns. So I've also interviewed a lot of gun owners, interviewed a mainline Protestant in a very affluent church in a very affluent community, and he said that he, had a concealed carry permit. He carried his gun to church. He thought that was important. And I said, do you think other people in your church are carrying guns? And he said, I hope so. So there is a movement to carry guns within churches, and that's something that we all have to be aware of and in conversation about. On the other hand, do I have 2 more minutes?
Oh, you got it.
Okay.
You Katie Davis.
Doesn't count for much, really. On the other hand, there are streets in cities, and in this city are awash in illegal guns. And last year, 2015, as Everett knows quite well, there were 273 gun deaths in this city. Overwhelmingly African American men. These are Black lives that need to matter.
Yes, yes.
And to put this in perspective, all of Canada, with 36 million people, had fewer than 200 gun deaths last year. And our city had more gun deaths than, get this, all of Spain, all of Australia, all of the United Kingdom, all of Japan, all of Finland combined. So this is a shame. This illegal gun trafficking. I had a high school a teacher say to me, my kids can get a gun more easily than they can get a textbook. So that is a judgment on us, on our city. So I guess then the question, the other big research question I'm trying to work on is, how does this reality of illegal guns among people who do feel very vulnerable in our society, and are choosing to arm themselves, if illegally, how does this correspond to the low levels of gun ownership in African American, Latino, Muslim, and Jewish congregations? So I guess I'm left with some questions. I'm eager for congregations to engage in these questions. What is our theology about security? This seminary, some of you who are alums might not know that this seminary passed a gun policy, a campus gun policy this year. I mean, I've been here a long time, and it's hard. I was kind of pinching myself, like, our seminary needs a gun policy. But all campuses do, and congregations, we need to be talking about this. So I welcome this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. One of the things that I would like to basically begin with is the perspective that I will bring is a perspective that comes through my experience. Yes, as the Deputy Mayor for Public Safety, having seen and been privy to quite a lot of the information that is going on a daily, weekly, and sometimes by the moment actions, one thing that I do not miss is the fact that I only have one phone now instead of 4. Because at any time, and that's the perspective from government, at any time the citizenry expects its government to keep it safe.
That's right.
That is the primary number one reason for government all over this country.
That's right.
And if you can't keep people safe, you're not doing your job. And given the history of the government in this, not only city, but state and country, listening to what Pastor Johnson said, you have to say, has the government done its job? And I'm always a student of history.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that part of the reason why we have struggled with our responsibility as government is that we don't really do history very well. We don't really understand the depth of the history. We don't understand the experiences of history, and we don't want to really learn from history. And without doing that, much like we do here at seminary, we always say that you can take a text out of context, but you got to have the context to truly understand where you're going to go. And that's what they drill here. I know, I used to be here. And the bottom line was, don't just take and look at one set of words that actually you think mean something. There had to be a beginning, there was a context for where it was done, and then there's a development of the words that you have to get behind. And with my professor here, he would always get into my head about my Hebrew. You have to understand the root of where these things are coming from. So I want to talk about the root of terrorism in America, because I think that government has a role in expressing that, in dealing with that, and then bringing it forward. And I think that that's what we have to truly get into. So my talk, and I did that as a little bit of a preamble, my talk will start off with something that I think that causes me to want to get involved with government. After 30 years being outside, I was asked by a friend, my really good friend, to come in and help. And he said to me, because I told him he was crazy, to invite a person like me to come into government, because I said that those who do not understand what I did will criticize you for making this choice. And he said, well, they'll get to know you, and after a while, they'll understand. Because I did Capitol Defense for almost 30 years. I was trying to keep people off of death row. I was trying to get the system to work better for those who could not speak for themselves. You have to really care about the poor, and you have to actually be poor. You have to be poor in humbleness, in spirit, in order to identify where you want to do and where you want to go, in order to help change a system that really has a blind eye to how we treat one another. So yes, the mayor was criticized upon my being asked to do the job, but as even my harshest critic said upon my leaving, they said they wish I didn't go, because I was investing in the right ways of getting people trained to see one another.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Because once you see the other person, you've defeated the terrorist actions.
Yeah.
You defeated the terrorist power. And getting police officers, which is part of what I did, trying to get them to see the other person before taking certain actions, those will diffuse a lot of the problems that we had in our communities. Now, that's not going to be an instantaneous wave your wand and it's going to happen. But what I was trying to do is get people to understand the history of how we involve one another with what we call community. So I would always say I would always bring out the Isaiah 58:12 moment, and I'll just read it. Those from among you will rebuild the ancient ruins. You will raise up the age-old foundations. You will be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of the streets in which to dwell. And if you're in government, that passage is something that really motivates you, because you're not there for the pay.
That's right.
Right? You're not there for the pay. You're there because you really think and do believe that government has a role in repairing the breach that is existing in this country from the very beginning. And terrorism, and that's the proper role of government. Now, we can have a discussion about how that should come out, but I think that people who believe that government should just leave me alone are the reasons why people, they arm themselves. Because they have a fear of this communal understanding that we call society. The one thing that we have called for, and the mayor went out of his way to try to constantly say that if we're not giving and developing public safety in this city, then we're not doing our job. When we came in 2007, Philadelphia was averaging 407 to 425 killings a year. And I told the mayor, but unless it gets down to something, I mean, so what's an acceptable number of people getting killed in your city?
Right, that's right, yeah.
I mean, I said I want to get it better, but I'm not going to, and I can't take a bow that at our best we got it down to 250. There were still 250, mostly African-American young men between the ages of 16 and 34 that were killing each other, and I could only get it down to 250, and last year it went up to 274.
Yeah.
I can't be proud of that because we've had more people who's died in all of our cities across the country in 1 year who died altogether in 9/11. The mayor used to talk about all the time that terrorism, this whole idea of the fear that government has to explain to people. See, I think we do a poor job of explaining what's the root cause of the fear. Their fear, our fear, your fear. That's our job. Because once we understand our history, once we understand where this comes from, once we actually acknowledge our own role, and I'm old enough to be able to say we are. This is the other cartoon that I keep on my dresser drawer. I see it every day. We have seen the enemy.
Yeah.
He is us.
Yes.
And if we don't really understand that, and that's a pogo moment for all y'all young kids in here. That's called pogo. Y'all can Google it and you can take a look at it and you'll figure out what it says. But, you know, pogo, there was some real truth in what that little rascal was talking about. You have to understand the history. So I have been part of a movement in Cities United. We started a movement, the mayor, Mayor Landrieu, Mayor Nutter, Mayor Landrieu, and Dr. Bell from the Casey Family Foundation started a movement trying to talk about how to bring and get communities engaged. Because where you have an engaged community, where you have a community that's taking part, where you have things that people care for one another, you actually have better public safety.
Yeah. Right.
Where I broke apart the entire city of Philadelphia, and we were working with areas because I think that location matters. Where you broke into that and you started rebuilding the community, guess what? The data, which is I'm a data junkie also, showed that we would get 20 and 30% reductions in crime and criminality. Why? Because not only were the police in line with the community was aligned with the police, and everybody understood that it wasn't just some knucklehead who was doing something wrong. That was Mary's son.
Yeah, that's right. There you go.
And now the police understood Mary, understood the son, and then I was able to get and hear, which is why I knew it was time for me to go, because the police commissioner, who I loved, Charles Ramsey, and Deputy Commissioner Bethel, came to me and said, you know, if we divert more kids away, rather than arrest them, and get them involved in a system that we know doesn't work, we can actually help rebuild the communities.
That's right. That's right.
And now, guess what?
Yeah.
That's what we're doing. Diverted 5,000 cases that they would have had a record. We're trying to rebuild the communities. We have to be the repairers of the breach. And the breach on terrorism is because we don't want to understand the history. So I always call for, again and again, and this is where I will take my Episcopal roots and say that Bishop Desmond Tutu did something that people really don't, and took part in a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa that was the beginning of a different type of reconciliation, because it actually did not try to hide the wounds that just fester and then break out again. He tried to give people voice, to allow them to express what you did to me, why you have done it to me, and how we can engage. So that once that was done, I'm not saying that's the be-all and end-all, but at least that was the start of the engagement that is necessary to deal with the terrorism and to deal with the fear that we have. And so government's role is to not just come, and I can talk to you about the fact that houses of worship should be doing preparations. I know how to get it done. We have actually done it in the city of Philadelphia, where I was sending people out to large houses of worship for the most part, because there is, you know, as they say, Jesse James or somebody once said, why do you rob banks? He said, well, that's where the money is. Well, on Sundays, there's a couple big places you can go and get paid. And so we would help those churches make sure that they were secure so that they could take the alms that were given and get them to the proper banking institutions. We would do that free of charge, because that's part of what you pay taxes for, but we do it quietly. We can talk about how to prepare, and every church has to be prepared, not just for robbery, but how many, I mean, there's still churches burning in the South. There's still churches burning up north. People don't talk about it, but houses of worship are still going in. The Ku Klux Klan is alive and well in the state of Pennsylvania. I know, I've seen the reports. So we have a historical understanding that we have to bring to this discussion. And I think that we should be advocating for direct commissions that allow people who have been hurt, who have been injured, who have never been heard or never been talked to allow them to say what they need to say, and to be able to then give witness to how we have to go on and go to the next one. But I'd love to take part in the discussion that we would have here. But thank you very much.
I would like to open up the floor now for any questions. We do have time for at least 3 questions, and if they go shorter, maybe even 4 questions that you have for all 3. Notice I put myself out of that, all 3 of the panelists, or one in particular.
I think that there is obvious wisdom in what you've talked about, but I think that the focus, and a lot of times people tell me the churches are dying, and I think that there's a type of church that is dying, because remember, the religion is not the church.
Yeah, that's right.
And we can have a lot of these empty stones that are just happens to be buildings. The church is the people who inhabited the place. And that's what you have to focus your building on. And if a particular denomination doesn't make it in a particular area, it's because they have not cultivated the spirit in that space that allows for people to worship the way that they believe they will find Jesus, or whoever it is else. And I guess I don't have to say that anymore since I'm not in government.
Yeah,
I can actually just,
you're free.
I can just say freedom, right? I can just say, you can't find Jesus where you need it to be. I am always still called to be ecumenical.
Yeah.
And I respect, you will find God wherever you find God. And I think that there might be a huge building that has now gone barren because they did not cultivate the right spirit inside of it. But usually, right next door, right down the street, there's some other ones that are just happening to be pulling together. I'm sitting with a person who is a church builder on this panel. You find your place where God will put you, and if you are responsive to where God wants you to be and to the people, you will get to be able to cultivate not only the sheep,
Right.
but you will actually be able to cultivate a whole community. And that's what you're trying to build. You're trying to build a worshiping community, and being in a space will allow you to do that. So I think that I believe you're right, that people have to encounter Jesus where they will find him. I don't believe that it's right just because we find empty buildings that means there's an absence of Jesus. I just think that there's an absence of perhaps getting the people to worship in the ways and means that they are used to so they can express their meeting Jesus in the way that's comfortable. But there are always going to be the death of the church. I remember I did take a course here we've been talking about the death of Jesus now for almost 50 years. And there's really more people encountering Jesus today than any other time in the world's history. So I think that that's just one place where I'll go to my Baptist brothers at sometimes and say, that's where the devil's just a liar, right? But thank you for your question.
Is there another question? Yes, sir. Yes.
Hello. Can you talk about gun violence, terrorism, and mental health?
Yeah, it's a very good question because, Reverend Butts, when I was at Abyssinian, he would say that all of us need to get a checkup from the neck up. And mental health is so important. And if you are a pastor and if you are not, if you don't have a therapist, you need to have a therapist. And given all that you have to do and the people that you have to counsel and the issues that are there, you would not be wise if you do not have somebody that you can go to. It is a God benefit for you to do that, and it'll also be a blessing to your congregation. As I look at gun violence and mental health, it's needed, but I would even say it's even more so than mental health. What I have found, and this, I look at my own child, Miles, with this. I never forget, we were in New York. My wife and I, and our son was attending Riverside Academy, and our son acted out, totally lost his mind. He went to the teacher and was so angry, ripped her shirt open, all the buttons came off. My wife, she is a lawyer, so she was on assignment in Miami, working for a company, and I was working at Abyssinian, and so I had to go over to the school, and I never forget, it was a woman from the continent, from Africa, and she said, "Your son has a hole in his heart." And she said, "If you do not fill that hole, it is going to get larger and larger, but it will be filled." And so I share that with you because as I look at the young people who are out here, and I encounter them every day at OIC, is that many of them are still trying to fill the hole in their heart. And so mental health, yes, is a part of it, but mentorship, somebody coming in to kind of fill the breach, it is having that person, and a lot of the stuff that we deal with, it really boils down to our childhood, something that we missed, a hole that was never filled. And so we spend the rest of our lives trying to fill that hole, whether it is people who are sleeping around, they're just trying to fill the hole, whether it is individuals who are selling drugs, just trying to fill the hole. And what I have the privilege of doing every day at OIC, and I encourage all the pastors here, if you have people who are looking for jobs, please send them to Philadelphia OIC. We have great programs in hospitality. We're launching a coding boot camp this week in technology. But what we have started to do there at OIC, because we believe that everybody can succeed, and we don't have all the resources that PMHC has to do the great work with healthcare, but we have a strong wraparound program. And so we end up doing with people is that we begin to fill the hole, and we begin to help them to see that greatness is inside of them. And once people tap into that greatness, they begin to blossom. And I'll share this last story with you. In my first 6 months of being at OIC, I had a major issue that happened. One of our students who had just graduated had a marijuana charge when he was a teenager, came to OIC to get his life together, could not get a job because of something that happened in his childhood. And I never will forget, he was raised by a Mennonite family. He was an African-American child, but was in foster care. ended up committing suicide. Never will forget going out on 76, going to that service, all because that hole had not been filled. And so we have a great charge. This is where the church can come in. This is where the church can be helpful, is in trying to fill those spaces. And this is the real last part I would probably say is that too many times in our churches, we focus on worship. And I want to kind of challenge us. We sometimes focus too much on Jesus. And this is radical.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
We focus too much on Jesus versus trying to let Jesus live out in us. And that's a totally different mindset. Because if I stay focused on Jesus, then I will never focus on letting the message go through me so that I can live out the principles of Jesus. And so I challenge my church, Dare to Imagine, every day that, yes, we follow Jesus, but what good, as I said this past Sunday, what good is it to be called a Christian if we never see your Christianity in action?
Amen. I want to actually dovetail on something the Reverend just said. The issue, because for those of us in government, the very thing he talked about, where he had a person who had something that he had done a long time ago, was then holding him back from encountering a fuller life.
Right.
So when I came in, the first thing I did was we started helping people file for expungements. And people were saying, well, wait a minute, the police officers are arresting them. The courts that you are dealing with are prosecuting, and you're dealing with the DA and the defender, and you're funding that. And then you get to the end, you got probation and parole, and then you got everything going left. And at the end, now the person is left with this record. Now you want us to take responsibility for the record, get the record expunged so he can go on with his life. Yeah. I said, there's not too many things that a person gets a lifetime sentence for, and darn sure not for a joint.
Right.
So if we can't deal with this straight up, then we just playing games. Mm-hmm. And I don't believe in playing games. So we started expunging people's records and started asking people. And then I started, and I will challenge, I'll take the same challenge, because one of the first things I did is, because I did have to represent an individual once who had a record and he had not gone to court.
Yeah.
So there was a warrant out for his arrest. Now, there is a database that is outside, and when you get pulled over by a police officer, they do put your name in the database, and if you have a warrant, and everybody knows it, so police officer pulls over this kid, ends up knowing that when the officer goes back to his car, he's going to run the tag. So what did the guy do? He floored it. He went 3 blocks and he killed somebody in a car accident that I had to represent him on. Do you know what the charge was?
Wow.
Well, that was the ultimate charge. I'm talking about the charge that he was in fear about was a misdemeanor.
Yeah.
And it was 4 years old.
Wow.
So he ran out of fear.
Fear. Yeah.
If he would have just gone along, the cop probably wouldn't even taken him in. He would have given him the citation and told him to get it down to the court the next day. We know where you are. They would have been able to do it. But even if you would have been taken in, you'd been released the next day. Mm-hmm. But he was scared. Mm-hmm. And that's when I was told, by the practice that I had, that it was the fact of the matter is that people just don't understand that you're running from things that you don't understand, or you're running from fear, and it puts you in a worse position.
Yeah.
So then I went to the pastors. I called a breakfast meeting because I was told unless you feed them, they're not going to come. So I called a breakfast meeting. I called a breakfast meeting. I paid for it. Citizens paid for it. And we were at 3801. I wanted to make sure I had a large number. And I asked the pastors that you have more influence on people and you can help them if you would just say, I know that people who are coming to church every day don't have warrants, but you may know somebody who does. Right. Bring them to me. Bring them to you. Just invite them to come to your church. I will make arrangements with the courts so that if you bring the person in, I'm not going to waste your time, I'm not going to waste their time. We're actually going to get rid of that warrant so that that person can go on with life.
Right, right.
At the end, I said, now this is what we're doing. This is how, I mean, and you already now, I believe the reason why you wanted a collar is because you wanted to take part in transformation. You wanted to be part of allowing a person to be in a better situation after they came through your doors than after they leave. And this was and I said, this is free. You ain't got to worry about doing that. I'm not going to waste your time. Worked it out with the courts, worked it out with everybody, worked it out with the DA. I said, because if I get a pastor to come in with somebody, I don't want them sitting on the bench. I want them to get in,
Right.
get out, and I want to make sure that unless it's murder, put the person, give them another subpoena and let them go, or dispose of the case right then and there.
Right.
One way or the other. I had 7 pastors in the city of Philadelphia that stayed with me for the entire 6 years that did that job.
Wow.
I invited 475.
Wow. Wow.
And the main question that was asked was, how much are you going to pay me to do this work?
Yeah. Wow.
And I
Wow.
said, I thought this was your work.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right.
And so when we say that we want to be able to help people transform, I just want to be able to ask, you have such outreach, and this is where you have government working with you. I'm trying to pull barriers down. I'm trying to fill that breach. This was something that we could do, and the person that I loved and miss her dearly was Reverend Handy, who
Yeah,
worked with
that's
me
right, that's right.
in putting this together. And I kept saying to people over and over again, if you, the smile on the person's face when they know they're no longer running,
Yeah, yeah,
when they finally get caught,
that's right. Yeah.
and they can say, all that I did is now gone.
Gone. Yeah.
And I'm a new creature.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes,
I'm
sir.
giving myself an opportunity.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
yeah.
what I think that we're supposed to be about. That's what government is supposed to do. And that's what we, I think, working together can help transform. But we have to acknowledge that everybody in here got a history. We all got to make sure that we are all new creatures in Christ.
Thank you so much. We've run out of time, and I'm going to invite Brother Gillison to return to seminary since he's trying to stir up the Baptist preachers that are sitting here. Because I was ready to tune up and say Jesus dropped the charges, but and in the right place, I get the right response. I've asked Dr. Katie Day to close us out in prayer. She mentioned the theology on security. And we have to admit that what we heard on today, we've just touched the surface. There's so many layers still to unravel. And I think Dr. Johnson really hit it when he went from the head to the heart. And it's so much all of us can do. And as members of the body of Christ, our sphere of influence, the people who come into our lives, may be those persons that were described by both Gillison and Johnson. And maybe we can help fill in that gap for them. Be the one that restores restoration in their life. Again, as we close, if there is a gift that you would like to leave, please see Sarah, my friend Amy Grant. She can sing, I'm telling you, y'all, she can sing. And Dr. Day, thank you so much. You really set the ground for us. I see how dear this was to you. And let's try to do this again. Dr. Day, we're in your hand.
Let us pray together. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Loving and living God, you who are called the Prince of Peace.
Yes, God.
We cry, peace, peace, and there is no peace. We have heard today of breaches that need to be repaired and holes in our hearts. Oh God, we pray that you will repair our hearts and enable us to be agents of your reconciliation
Yes, God.
in neighborhoods, in communities, in this city, in this world. We thank you, oh God, for the UTI, for Reverend Jackson, for his legacy, for these two emerging leaders, young women who are doing such excellent work.
Yes, God.
We thank you that you move in and through them, through this place, through the UTI, and pray that, in fact, we will not follow you with shutters on our eyes, but allow your Spirit to work through us. In the name of your Son, our brother and Lord, Jesus, we pray.
Amen.